My brothers and sisters, April Fool's Day was last week, and for one day in the entire year, everyone tried to be funny. A day of pranks ranging from funny product promotions to just some of the most outrageous stunts I've ever seen. And just when I thought I've seen it all, I thought it'd be a great idea to take a browse through the UFC stats website. And boy, did I come to a realization. Because nothing can compare the pranks of last week to the ongoing prank that the UFC has given us for the past few years when putting up the stat leaders on their website. Did you know that Casey O'Neill, a name unknown to many, has the title of possessing the most aggressive hands in the UFC? How about Nordine Taleb, a fighter who isn't in the UFC anymore, and the most notable loss he has is to welterweight Sean Strickland? Yeah, well, he's credited for having the highest takedown accuracy in the UFC. And when you look at takedown defense, you'd imagine some MMA legend to take the cake on this record. Someone like John Jones, who's been reigning the top of the UFC light heavyweight division for years and has stuffed takedowns from D1 wrestlers like Daniel Cormier. But if you guessed John Jones to have the highest takedown defense in the UFC, you'd be sad to find out that he's only number 2. Next to Julio Arce. I'm sorry, but who? But as much as I can laugh at these incredulous UFC leaders and leave it be just for the giggles, in my conscience, I can't let this slide. So let's not just have a giggle at the quirks of these UFC stat leaders, but instead, let's rewrite the narrative. How about we fix this? In the UFC, we're blessed to have a wide array of strikers. From the technical Muay Thai athletes that use all their 8 limbs to cut up their opponents, to the masters of the basics who only know how to use their fists. Among these diverse strikers, there's a notable distinction in aggression levels. Some fighters prefer a more calculated approach, picking their shots strategically and waiting for openings. On the other hand, there are those who embody sheer aggression in the octagon, relentlessly pressing forward, throwing bombs with the intent to knock out, or rapid flurries to overwhelm their opponent. Some examples of these fighters are Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje, and Sean O'Malley. Yet, if we put these well-known legends in perspective of the whole leaderboard for strike output, they don't even crack the top 3. And well, the leader isn't even ranked in the top 10 of her own division. So, how do we fix this stat to reflect competition? Looking at the stat leaderboard criteria, it says that the minimum a UFC fighter needs is 5 fights to be ranked, which is a very loose lower bound since, a lot of times, fighters might not even be facing the highest competition after 5 fights. So let's change this requirement to at least 8 fights. This should give us a good minimum to work with. If we do this, then we start seeing a clearer picture on our candidates for strike output. The 2 big guys that duked it out in November now occupy the 1st and 2nd place of the leaderboard. Sean O'Malley now breaks into the top 3, aided by his amazing performance against Chito Vera, and we got a few more notable faces that make it in the rankings for strikes landed per minute. These are our new rankings. While seeing other fighters striking aggressively with each other is often the highlight of MMA bouts, the sport encompasses more than just punches and kicks. Grappling plays a pivotal part in the sport, with fighters employing techniques from jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and other martial arts to take down, control, or submit their opponents. The UFC also gives us some stats on grappling to reflect this aspect of the game. And with these stats, it also gave us some of the most ridiculous stat line attributed to fighters that I've ever seen. Crazy, but true. The UFC, though, at least has some common sense when putting up stat leaders for takedowns on their website, and requires them to have at least 20 attempted takedowns and 5 UFC fights. But it still leaves a lot of room for improvement. The current stat leaders look something like this. Or like this, to give you some more perspective. With Nordine Taleb taking the cake on the most accurate takedowns in the UFC. But who exactly is this guy? A quick look at his stats page shows that his last fight was in 2019, and hasn't really attempted any takedowns in the latter parts of his career. Let's adjust this stat line leaderboard to instead use a 30 takedown minimum. When we do that, we get something a little better, with GSP now taking the cake on takedown accuracy. But there's still room for improvement. So we'll add a 10-fight UFC minimum requirement to enter this leaderboard to make sure fighters are able to land their takedowns against the top of the ranks. Now we can see a really clear picture on who the true leader of the pack is. From his early days as a welterweight contender to his climax as a 2-division UFC champion, GSP's takedowns were a cornerstone of his success. Whether it was his explosive double legs or his slick trips and throws, GSP's takedowns were not just a means to control the fight, but a testament to his tactical brilliance inside the octagon. These are the new updated ranks. While the ability to secure takedowns is essential, being able to thwart the relentless takedown attempts from your opponents is also equally vital. Proven anti-wrestlers like Jon Jones or Kamaru Usman should be at the very top of the stat line. Yet when we look at the current stat leaders for takedown defense in the UFC, you'd be surprised that there's probably only one big name you recognize. And he isn't even number one on this list. There's just something wrong with seeing unranked Julio Arce be over top of debatably the greatest fighter of all time in stuffing takedowns. So let's fix this leaderboard. Like last time, we'll put in a minimum of 30 takedown attempts by opponents, but we'll use a minimum of 8 fights to qualify for this new leaderboard. When we do that, we now get this. And now we have a clear ranking for our takedown defenders. Jon Jones has faced a myriad of elite wrestlers and grapplers, yet time and time again, he's showcased an almost impregnable defense against takedowns. His ability to sprawl, use underhooks, and slick footwork has thwarted the takedown attempts of the sport's ranking elite. As one of the most complete fighters in MMA history, Jon Jones' takedown defense is an underrated, yet a very defining aspect of his legacy, solidifying his status as an all-time great. Here are the new leaderboards for takedown defense. As we reflect on the quirks and discrepancies within the UFC stat leaderboards, it's clear that there's a need for a more accurate representation of fighters' skills and achievements. From the surprise of Casey O'Neill possessing the most aggressive hands in the UFC, to Nordine Taleb being the most potent wrestler in the UFC, the current state of the stat leaders leaves much to be desired. And even though I tried my best to rectify these stat lines, I also recognize that more can be done. The journey to reform the UFC stat leaderboards isn't simply about correcting thresholds and setting higher minimum fight requirements. It's about honoring the dedication and talent of the elite, who dedicate their entire lives in the pursuit of excellence in MMA, and ultimately, ensuring that the true champions of the octagon receive the recognition they deserve. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like the content, feel free to subscribe, like, comment, or share the video. And please be civil in the comment section. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.